Chapter 1. The order has come, shut them down. The first spark of resistance rising from the heart of Africa. It was August 2025. The capital of Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, was cloaked in heat, dust, and silence. But that morning, the city was about to experience one of its noisiest mornings in history. At 8 a.m. local time, all television and radio broadcasts across the country suddenly went off air. Instead, a single image appeared, President Ibrahim Traoré directly addressing his people. His eyes held an unusual determination. O people of Burkina Faso, honorable children of Africa. Today, I bring you the news of a decision that will shape not only our country's future, but the future of our entire continent. We are expelling from our borders the companies that have operated on our lands for decades, yet have left us with nothing that truly belongs to us. The speech lasted only a few minutes, but its impact would send shockwaves for years to come. Traoré had ordered the immediate cessation of operations of many major Israeli companies, operating not only in his own country but across the continent. The list was announced: Netcom Africa, the largest telecommunications provider in West Africa; Sion Defense Systems, a leader in military equipment and drone technology; Green Desert Agriculture, a giant firm active in agricultural seeds, fertilizers, and biotechnology; Maccabi Medtech, a chain of private hospitals and medical software providers; McDonald's Africa Limited, a franchise network operating throughout the African continent. Traoré claimed that these companies were not only economic entities, but also tools for intelligence gathering, cultural hegemony, and political influence. According to him, these companies were viruses coursing through Africa's veins, and now it was time to cleanse that virus. Initial reactions inside the country. The National Security Council convened at 5 a.m. and passed the decision unanimously. Traoré announced that he would personally oversee the implementation. Special units loyal to the government surrounded the Netcom headquarters in the capital from the early hours. Employees were escorted out, broadcast equipment sealed, and data centers stamped with official state seals. Crowds began gathering outside McDonald's branches. Some bid farewell to the burger menus, while others chanted slogans like, "Our local food culture will be reborn." At the Sion Defense Office in the capital, a very different intervention took place. Special commandos seized control of all digital systems inside. According to reports, the premises contained not only engineering projects, but also private servers holding facial recognition data of civilians. First echoes in international media: BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and France 24. All made this event their headline the same day, though with different tones. BBC: Has Burkina Faso declared war on Israeli companies? CNN: Radical move by Traoré, anti-West winds grow in Africa. Al Jazeera: Historic Africans stand against Israeli influence. France 24: After France, is Israel now the target? Israeli media, on the other hand, were furious. The Jerusalem Post labeled Traoré populist dictator. A statement from Netanyahu's office called the decisions anti-Semitic and contrary to trade law. But for the African people, the situation was very different. What did the people say? Social media exploded. Hashtags #Traoré Revolution and #Africa for Africans trended. Worldwide within hours, people from Ouagadougou to Dakar, Bamako to Khartoum shared messages of support. One Twitter user wrote, "We were never slaves to McDonald's. We have our own Faso sauce, our own traditional food. Long live African cuisine, long live Traoré." Another wrote, "Netcom gave us internet but no freedom. Now we have both internet and freedom." Traoré was closely monitoring these reactions. Throughout the day, he mingled with the public and addressed the crowd. In front of a closed McDonald's branch. "Today, we didn't just lock the door of a restaurant. We locked the door on the system stealing our future." Economic concerns. Of course, things weren't entirely smooth. Opposing economists warned that these decisions might severely damage Burkina Faso's economy and scare away international investors. The stock market experienced brief volatility. But later that day, Traoré took another step. For every foreign company shut down, a local alternative will be established. 1 billion CFA has been allocated for entrepreneurs. Priority will be given to women, youth, and indigenous people. This statement eased panic somewhat. Local investors and business people from the African diaspora issued declarations of support. Those waiting in the shadows. However, this move concerned much bigger balances than just Burkina Faso. As French influence in West Africa waned, Israeli companies had grown stronger in the region. Now those balances were shaking as well. Mossad and the CIA began closely monitoring developments. The CIA's West Africa desk chief said, "This is not just an economic move. It could be the beginning of a chain reaction." And indeed, it was. This decision was not merely about closing a few companies. It was the awakening of a continent's consciousness. A new era was beginning not only for Burkina Faso but for all of Africa. Chapter 2. Netanyahu's response, the silent storm. As the sun rose over Tel Aviv that morning, not only light, but the shadow of a crisis filtered through the windows of the Ministry of Defense. Initially, Israel interpreted the events unfolding in Burkina Faso as a local political outburst. But as hours passed, it became clear this was no ordinary government decision. Ibrahim Traoré's call to expel dozens of Israeli companies not only from Burkina Faso but from the entire African continent triggered the highest level of alarm in Israel. Red phones rang in the Prime Minister's office. Within minutes, the Defense Minister, the Economy Minister, and the Mossad Director gathered in Netanyahu's private crisis room. Such meetings were usually kept secret, but this time the magnitude was so great that Netanyahu himself appeared before the cameras. Today, an unlawful step has been taken in the heart of the African continent. Our allied companies provide employment to hundreds of thousands of Africans, offering technology and healthcare services. Targeting these companies is a threat, not only to Israel, but to the international investment environment. We are investigating who is behind this hostile move against the State of Israel. This statement was brief, harsh, and direct, but it would not be enough for Israel. Because the real issue was not economic, it was strategic. The quietly built system in Africa, developed over decades, was on the verge of collapse. Mossad reports the fall of the deep structure. Mossad Director Yoav Avner presented a special file to Netanyahu. The report's title was one word: the Traoré Plan. The report revealed that Ibrahim Traoré was not merely a spontaneous leader. For the past 2 years, he had held secret meetings and maintained close contacts with other young military leaders across Africa. He had especially built a tight network with military regimes in Niger, Mali, Guinea, Sudan, and Eritrea. But the most striking part was Traoré's diplomatic ties with China and Iran. While China's presence in Africa was well known, this time the matter was not investment but strategy. The report ended with this sentence: "If Traoré succeeds, Israel's intelligence network in Africa could collapse. After France, we could lose our second major foreign power in Africa." Netanyahu stared at this line for a long time. Then, without looking at any of his advisors, he gave a single order: Israel will not just observe. If Traoré thinks he is alone, we are not alone either. Coordination with the West. Later that day, Netanyahu held talks with the White House, the Élysée Palace, and 10 Downing Street in London. Especially, the US president viewed the issue with strategic seriousness, because Traoré was targeting not only Israel but the Western system as a whole. At a secret meeting in the Pentagon, the status of American special forces in Burkina Faso was evaluated. The word operation was not yet spoken aloud, but everyone knew it was a possibility. That same day, Israel recalled its ambassador from Burkina Faso. Then Burkina Faso's ambassador in Tel Aviv was expelled. Diplomatic ties were severed. Growing support in Africa. However, despite all Israel's diplomatic maneuvers, support for Traoré was growing across the continent, particularly in Mali. The people began staging protests calling for Israel's expulsion after France. Young officers in Niger called the developments. In Burkina Faso, a brother revolution. Radio Conakry in Guinea commented live. Traoré speaks not just for Burkina Faso but for all Africa. The exploitation system built for years with the cooperation of foreign powers is now cracking. Many African academics began calling these developments the new wave of Pan-Africanism. And this wave was increasingly associated with a single leader, Traoré. The political attack begins. While Israel and the West kept military options on hold for now, an intense media propaganda campaign began. International news agencies started to report that Traoré was becoming a dictator, making unlawful decisions, and that the people were suffering from economic crisis. The Economist put Traoré on its cover with the headline, "Where is Africa heading?" The New York Times went further, writing, "Is Burkina Faso China's new puppet in Africa?" These reports created the expected impact in the West. But the African people found these attacks unwarranted. Especially on social media, a counter-campaign arose. Traoré is not a dictator, he is a revolutionary. Say no to Western media lies. Africa doesn't smear its leaders, it elevates them. McDonald's becomes a symbol. One of the most symbolic events in all this turmoil was the collapse of McDonald's. In front of the main branch, in Ouagadougou, locals set up a traditional food stall called Mama Adama. A social media campaign started with the hashtag, "Not fast food, real food." This was the moment when the concept of economic independence became tangible among the people. The issue was no longer just about expelling big companies but about creating local alternatives. Netanyahu's last move. At the end of the second week, Netanyahu broke his silence again, this time with much sterner words. Ibrahim Traoré is leading the African people toward a dangerous abyss. Israel will not hesitate to take every measure to protect its citizens, companies, and allies. After this statement, rumors spread that the Israeli Navy increased patrols off the African coast. It was also claimed that some Israeli agents in Africa were secretly evacuated from Burkina Faso. But by then, it was too late. The Traoré wind had spread across the continent. Chapter 3, Africa Stands Up, Unity Awakens on the Continent. Ibrahim Traoré's decision to expel Israeli-based companies from Africa had sparked a wildfire not only in Burkina Faso but across the entire continent. This spark quickly ignited the brush. It was no longer just a national issue. It was becoming a continental awakening. Across the continent, especially in West Africa, people poured into the streets. This time the banners were different. Colonialism is over. No to the West, yes to Africa. Traoré is not alone. From Ouagadougou to Bamako, the voice of the people. The movement that started in Burkina Faso found its quickest echo in Mali. Only 48 hours after Traoré's announcement, Mali's President Assimi Goïta declared that the operations of the same companies in his country were being reconsidered. Then, thousands gathered in front of the presidential palace in Mali's capital and chanted in unison, "If one of us is attacked, all of us are attacked." Some protesters shouted, "Make Traoré president of Mali," while others said in local radio programs, "Africa's liberation has begun. The chains of colonialism are breaking one by one." The streets were filled not only with young people but also elderly women, children, clergy, and artists. It was as if a long-awaited call for freedom had finally been made. Niger, Guinea, Sudan, a chain reaction. Burkina Faso's neighbor Niger had largely severed ties with France last year. Now, its eyes turned to Israeli companies. Niger's defense minister said, "Traoré's decision is courageous and rightful. We are ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with any government that believes in Africa's freedom." Following this, the Netcom office in Zinda, the country's largest city, was surrounded by protesters. As demonstrations escalated, the government temporarily suspended the company's license. Guinea had long maintained a cautious stance toward the West, but this time it went further. President Mamadi Doumbouya saluted Traoré on national television. In his statement, "He is not only the leader of Burkina Faso but of Africa. We cannot remain indifferent to this call. In Sudan, despite civil war and conflicts, some resistance groups released messages supporting Traoré. A group of refugees marched near the Uganda border, carrying banners reading, "Stop the war, let the colonizers go." Africa's youth, a new generation awakens. The strongest pillar of this movement was Africa's youth. With a population heavily under 25, young people had turned social media into the voice of Traoré's revolution. On TikTok, the trend from McDonald's to local markets began. Youth shared videos of themselves preparing traditional dishes with the hashtag African foods. Hundreds of videos appeared on YouTube. Who is Traoré? Why are Western companies being expelled from Africa? What is the new Pan-Africanism? Artists on Instagram painted huge murals of Traoré and created graphics, likening him to Che Guevara. One Twitter user wrote, "My grandfather fought French colonialism. My father resisted the IMF. And now I stand against Western propaganda on TikTok. We are with Traoré." African women, the rise of silent power. Traoré's reforms brought great hope especially to rural women entrepreneurs. It was announced that local women's cooperatives would be given priority instead of the closed McDonald's branches. Adama Sanu, 52, living in Kaya, spoke at her small stall set up in front of an old McDonald's building. "For years, they made me work as a cleaner. Now, I am opening my own restaurant. Traoré gave us not only freedom but dignity." Her words quickly went viral. A campaign was started with the hashtag Adama's restaurant, and support funds were collected. Hundreds of thousands of CFA francs were raised, and Adama's shop opened with a sign saying, "This is no longer the kitchen of the West, but the kitchen of Africa." The West's eyes widened in alarm. Analysts in Paris, London, and Washington watched these developments with concern. The French newspaper Le Monde ran this headline, "One Ibrahim awakens Africa." The US Africa desk advisor stated in a briefing to Congress, "If this movement spreads, Western influence in Africa could be erased for a generation." In response, the West launched counter-campaigns under banners like democracy, freedom of expression, and investment security. But these had lost credibility among African peoples, because now the continent had begun to write its own story. Traoré's message to the continent. Following these events, Traoré appeared on screen again. But this time, he was not alone. Senior delegations from Mali, Guinea, Niger, and Chad stood beside him. Facing the cameras, he said, "This is a people's movement. This is a revolution belonging to Africa's mothers, fathers, youth, and children. We want to grow not just products but futures on our land. We are breaking the chains of a system that belittled us, and no power can stop us now." Traoré's speech was broadcast live on television. Afterwards, people flocked to mosques, churches, and squares across Africa. Prayers were offered. Songs were sung. Women wore local clothes. Children painted African flags on their faces. A revolution was growing not only through politics but through emotion. Chapter 5. Echoes in Jerusalem and the Silent Crisis. In Israel, news initially surfaced through leaks. Several major Israeli companies operating in Africa had their activities suspended. However, it was thought to be merely a commercial issue, until Burkina Faso's official state television broadcast President Traoré's statement, "No foreign power will ever be able to mortgage the future of our people again, whoever they may be." These words were a direct challenge. Israel's presence was now being questioned not only economically but politically. From Mossad to the Foreign Ministry, from media experts to crisis advisors, everyone was mobilized simultaneously. Netanyahu was already in a difficult position domestically, and this move shook the foundations of his influence in the region. Emergency meetings were held within the cabinet. Voices rose. Who does Traoré think he is to challenge a power like Israel? Yet, the more cautious recognized that this was no ordinary reaction but a deep strategic shift. Africa had long been not only an economic market but also a diplomatic playing field. Traoré was reshaping that arena. Previously secret agreements were leaked to the press. Documents revealed that Israeli defense companies provided technological support to certain African countries at very low costs, in exchange for control over natural resources. Allegations that Traoré's administration was involved in leaking. These documents sparked debates in Western media for days. Chapter 7. Netanyahu's silent move. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was presiding over a secret meeting held in the early hours at his office in Jerusalem. Around the table were senior Mossad intelligence officers, foreign affairs advisors, and trade envoys managing Israel strategies in Africa. The room was silent but tense. For the first time after watching Traoré's statements, Netanyahu spoke so openly. This man is serious and deliberate. He threatens not only our presence in Burkina Faso but throughout West Africa. If we remain silent, Africa will slip through our fingers. He slammed his hand firmly on the table. Then, looking at the files before him, he added, Traoré must not be left alone. Who supports him? Who is behind him? China? Russia? Or is he drawing power from within? Find out. The Mossad director spoke up. Within 2 weeks, we can build a network to infiltrate Traoré's inner circle. But we must be careful. This is not an ordinary coup leader this time. He has the people behind him. Netanyahu nodded. This was a kind of threat he was unaccustomed to. He was facing a leader strong not on the battlefield, but in ideology. And this was far more dangerous for Israel's business interests. That very night, Israeli intelligence began paying several media companies in Africa to produce anti-Traoré content. Some documents were leaked to international news agencies alleging Traoré had past ties with Russian mercenaries. The goal was clear: undermine his image and portray him as an unreliable leader in the eyes of the West. But something unexpected happened. The people of Burkina Faso reacted against these manipulations. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets of the capital. Holding photos of Traoré, their banners read, "They stole our gold, but now they cannot steal our honor." Not only Burkina Faso, people in Mali, Niger, and Guinea also took to the streets. In fact, posters of Traoré were hung up in several African countries. He was declared Africa's leader. Netanyahu did not back down but changed his plan. Instead of open attacks, economic pressure tactics came into play. Some Israel-based investors abruptly withdrew from Burkina Faso. Some European banks froze the country's loans. But Traoré was prepared. Pre-existing agreements with China and India kicked in. Direct barter of energy, medicine, and technology for gold began. This event caused a huge stir in the global media. Gold diplomacy against the dollar's grip. Traoré's new economic model, independence hidden in gold. Despite all plans, Netanyahu could not stop Traoré's rise. But he had not yet lost the game. A new plan was in the works. Much more complex, much deeper. Chapter 8. Historic meeting at the African Union. President Traoré's tough measures against Israeli companies quickly caused serious ripples across the African continent. From Togo to Nigeria, South Africa to Algeria, many countries began scrutinizing Israeli-origin investments on their soil. In light of these developments, the African Union decided to hold an extraordinary meeting. The African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa hosted perhaps one of the most crowded and tense meetings in its history. Addressing all member countries, President Traoré chose his words carefully. This decision is not just Burkina Faso's decision. This is Africa's struggle for dignity. We no longer want only freedom. We demand economic independence as well. His speech resonated throughout the hall. The representative from Cameroon stood and applauded Traoré, soon joined by representatives from Rwanda, Tanzania, and Sudan. However, not all countries agreed. Some nations with strong commercial ties to Israel were hesitant, advocating that the issue should be handled through diplomacy. At the end of the meeting, a declaration was issued. It emphasized that all African Union member states have the right to review foreign investments in line with their national interests. While Traoré's name was not explicitly mentioned, the text was deeply influenced by his vision. Chapter 9. Western media in turmoil. Major media outlets like CNN, BBC, Reuters, and Al Jazeera described Traoré's decision as one of the greatest challenges to Africa's economic independence. Especially in American media, there were comments suggesting the move would increase China's influence in Africa. Meanwhile, European press focused more on questioning Israel's position. The New York Times published an analysis titled, "A Global Powers Ready to Face Africa's New Leadership." The French newspaper Le Monde went further, writing, "Once a continent that received aid, Africa is now meeting leaders who write their own destinies. Traoré is the symbol of this." In contrast, the tone in Israeli media was harsh. The Jerusalem Post labeled Traoré populist provocateur, while some commentators hinted that Iran or China might be backing this uprising. Traoré remained silent. He was no longer focused on media battles but on economic realities. Chapter 9. Western Media in Turmoil. Major media outlets such as CNN, BBC, Reuters, and Al Jazeera described Traoré's decision as one of the greatest challenges to Africa's economic independence. Especially the American media commented that this move would increase China's influence in Africa. However, the European press was more focused on questioning Israel's position. The New York Times published an analysis titled, "A Global Powers Ready to Face Africa's New Leadership." The French newspaper Le Monde went further and wrote, "Continents that once received aid are now meeting leaders who write their own destinies. Traoré is the symbol of this." Chapter 10. On the brink of a golden age, the awakening of a continent. Months had passed. Burkina Faso was no longer alone. The revolutionary steps, initiated by President Traoré, had sparked a fire across Africa, with people taking to the streets in many countries, raising demands for economic freedom and fair trade. All Israeli commercial ventures in Burkina Faso were terminated. The vacated company facilities were nationalized by the government and handed over to local entrepreneurs and cooperatives. Mines once controlled by foreign monopolies had become the property of the Burkinabe people. Traoré delivered a historic speech announcing the dawn of this new era. "We are no longer just independent. We are a free nation. The gold is ours now. The land is ours. The labor is ours. And the future will be ours." That very day, celebrations erupted across the country. Students danced in the streets. Drums were played in villages. The day went down in history as the victory day of the Golden Revolution. The international community was stunned. Despite pressures from the IMF and World Bank, Traoré did not back down. In fact, the more he resisted, the more support grew. The country's economy had shed its old dependency model and transitioned for the first time to a system that worked for the people. In a United Nations vote, Burkina Faso's development model was declared an exemplary project. Traoré received a standing ovation at the UN General Assembly. Finally, he had fulfilled the dream he held since childhood. Africa's gold was now serving Africa. As the cameras went off, Traoré quietly fixed his gaze on the horizon and turned to those around him. "We have not only reclaimed our gold but also our dignity. From now on, no child will go hungry, no mother will weep. This is just the beginning. Africa is awakening."